The Creative Jungle podcast is all about speaking to and learning from inspiring entrepreneurs, creatives, and well-being experts. In each episode, we discuss their unconventional lives and journeys, what they've learned and how they've got to where they are now, any tips they can share with you so that you too may live a much more creative and happier life.
The podcast is brought to you by us, Dan and Sam. We're a couple who set up MYO and Creative Jungle Company, and we are all about helping people get creative and bringing a little bit more creativity to life and business. We host over 14 different arts and crafts workshops from our central London studio, virtually offsite at events and festivals. We have a range of creative kits, and we also run creative thinking workshops. So having helped thousands of people, we think we know a thing or two about helping people get creative and perhaps being a little bit happier. We hope to see you in the studio at some point soon too.
Be sure to subscribe so you can hear about future episodes. Right, let's get started. Here's the next episode. We have been absolutely looking forward to this podcast recording. We have Jaspreet Kaur, according to her Instagram, is an award-winning spoken word poet and writer known as Behind the Netra, a history teacher and author of Brown Girl Like Me, which comes out this autumn, but she is so much more than this.
She's made short films for the CBBC, spoken at a TEDx, is a research fellow in Birkbeck, and performed her poem, The Moment, to Her Majesty the Queen and the royal family, which was broadcast live on BBC to 2.4
billion people.
Billion with a B across the world. She's also been awarded the Asian Woman of Achievement Award for her work in arts and culture, the We Are the City Rising Star Award in education, and she's studied history and gender studies in university. You can find her at Behind the Netra. I can't pronounce it like that. That's Netra on Instagram and on behindthenetra.com.
So welcome, Jaspreet. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I am fully blushing from that introduction. Oh my God. Thank you guys so much. And
this is only half of it, really. But before we dive in, you were just telling us a little bit about this mental performance in front of the Queen to nearly like 2.5 billion people across the world.
Whatever that number is. What is that number? I know. It was insane. And that day is still a really surreal moment for me. And yeah, it definitely feels like, is that a dream or did that happen? But yeah, it was one of my biggest performances. It was held in Westminster Abbey in front of, the royal family, political leaders, world leaders, as well as kind of like a general audience from the UK. And then on top of that was broadcast live on TV. So it was one of those days where I was like, can't mess this one up.
How long did you prepare for that to get to that moment? Like, what was the prep like?
Yeah, so for that particular performance, it's actually quite a funny story. My husband and I were actually away that year on our 12-month honeymoon and backpacking across Asia. And we were then camping across southern and central Africa for 6 months as well. So we were away for those 12 months. We weren't planning to come back to the UK. And I got this email whilst we were away. And I remember we were in Cambodia at the time, and we had limited Wi-Fi when we were backpacking because we were going from hostel to hostel. So when we did have Wi-Fi, we'd have a quick check of our emails and carry on. And I saw this email saying, would you like to perform at Westminster Abbey for this service? And I honestly thought it was a hoax. I was like, someone's playing a mean prank on me and we'll see if I reply. This is not really an invitation to perform. And then I checked it all out and it was all legit. And I was like, okay, no, this is real. This is real. They'd seen my work online. They'd seen some of my performances on YouTube, and they wanted me to perform that particular poem, which was The Moment. And we then had to kind of rethink our plans whilst we were traveling. Could we make it back in that time? Yeah. And it just so happened that we had a 2-week window where we needed to renew our passport because we had run out of pages, which is an amazing luxury to have. So we needed to renew our passports. we had to come back for that. My husband actually had his graduation at that same time, and I was also invited for that performance. So it was kind of like the universe was telling us,
meant to be,
the universe is telling us, come home for 2 weeks. And we didn't tell our families either, so we came home fully. It was a full surprise when we landed back for those 2 weeks. And then I had I'd say about 3 months to prep for it and to rehearse for it. It was a poem I'd already written, so it was just a matter of memorizing it, because I wanted to do it in true spoken word form, which would be without script in hand. And on the day we had a dress rehearsal, and it was all very weird, very surreal day. But yeah, a really special day because my mom and dad were also there, my husband was there. And
you were just saying about having them on one side and the royal family, and you're like, where am
I looking? Yeah, where do I focus? Where do I make eye contact? Yeah, I just looked past everybody, because if I looked to the left, I would have probably freaked out and fainted. If I looked to the right, all I could see was my mum like bawling, like her eyes crying and bawling. I was like, no, I can't look that direction either.
Yeah, she must have been incredibly proud. Would you say that was one of your kind of proudest moments? I know we'll talk about that in a bit, but yeah, was that a highlight for you?
It definitely is a highlight. And I think there's been a lot of special performances over the years, and I'm really grateful that even some of the kind of more grassroots work that I've done, I've had the opportunity to work and perform on lots of incredible stages. But I think that one will always hold a special memory for me, because seeing the look on my mum and dad's face that day is something I can't get out of my memory. That will be something that's ingrained in me forever, because kind of just seeing it from their perspective, which is as immigrants that had moved to the UK in the 70s, coming here to set a foundation in the UK, and then for their children setting the expectation of, strong foundations, definitely a strong education, good jobs, and that's what myself and my siblings all went on to do. But this was something that they would have never expected.
No, pinnacle.
Their youngest daughter to be standing here in front of this audience that's broadcast live on TV across the world is something they would have never imagined. It really is a special memory for me and for them as well.
Oh, nice. Brilliant.
I have two silly questions just on that particular thing. Like, how long was the poem? And I'm just trying to figure out, I can't remember how long it was. And also, what was the acoustics like? Because it was in a very special place, which is like, there is lots of orations and ceremonies and stuff. Like, it must have, as a venue to perform, it must have been incredible.
This is really valid questions, and I wish somebody would have spoken to me about the acoustics of Westminster Abbey before I got there, because you're echoing out and can't hear yourself back, which was quite scary. And I had a mic in one ear and a microphone attached to me, and I couldn't actually hear myself in the usual way that I would when you perform on a standing mic. So it was quite scary. I was like, is anyone even hearing anything? Because is this even coming out right? But yeah, no, it was all fine. And the poem itself was about 2.5 minutes long. So
did that feel like the longest 2 minutes?
Yeah. And I had to go up a set of steps and perform, and at the end of the performance come down the steps, and then in the back of my head I'm like, okay, don't fall down these steps, it's strange what worries then come to your head when you're doing a big performance like that. But really special
get moment. So aware of every single thing that you're doing.
You get to halfway and you're like, on the home stretch, I'm nailing this, here we go.
Oh my gosh. And I love what you said about your parents being so proud, especially from having moved here in the 70s and then set up roots and then set up a platform for you guys to grow from. Let's go back to that childhood, and can you tell us a little bit about how you grew up and, any kind of formative experiences you had that have shaped you to where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. And my family are definitely a huge part of my life. And I grew up in quite a big family and quite an intergenerational household. Yeah. There was my grandparents, my parents, my siblings, and then my older siblings, where there's about a 14-year age gap when they got married. Wow. Also their kids as well. So my nephews and my niece also lived with us. So we definitely had quite an intergenerational household growing up. Yeah.
How many siblings do you have?
So I have two older brothers and one older sister. So there is a significant age gap between the older two. So my eldest brother and sister are in their early 40s. Then there was a 10-year gap. And we always laugh and say to my parents, like, what happened in those 10 years? And then my other brother was born. And then a year later, I was born. So yeah, quite a big family, and we're all very close. We see each other quite often, obviously, because the lockdown over the last year was really hard, and not spending time with one another over that time was really difficult for us, because we are used to big family get-togethers, and our family dinners just consist of 16 people, like minimum. Like that's a normal family dinner. And I don't know how to cook for less than 10 people. Even now, when I'm just cooking for myself and my husband, I end up cooking enough for like a week. And
really?
I'm like,
you need to teach me that. I end up making literally like 2 handfuls. I need to learn how to expand the cooking. Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, so it was always, growing up was always a lively, busy household, which had its pros and cons. And there was definitely no privacy in our household, which privacy wasn't a thing. So there was definitely a few downsides there too. But overall, that my childhood home was one of lots of happy memories. Yeah. But also some difficult times too. And I can definitely reflect on some of those moments too, and how I made it through those times. But yeah, my parents have definitely had a big role in inspiring who I am today, especially my dad. And I talk about that quite a lot, about how without the encouragement of from my dad to get into reading, to love books, our house used to be so full of books, and it would be authors from all around the world and all walks of life. And my dad would take us to the library every single week. We had a local library that my dad would always take us to. I'd take out as many books as I could, read them all within that week, and return them back the following week and get more. And my dad definitely encouraged that love for literature, that love for learning, and also for my love for history. And that's probably one of the reasons why I went on to study history at university, and even went on to go on to write, and even being a poet. So yeah, they had a big role in all of that, and my dad definitely played a big part in inspiring my love for reading, my love for books. Did you know at the time that that's what you wanted to do when you grew up, doing this mixture of being a writer and a teacher? Did you have that in your mind, or actually you had something completely different? Yeah, definitely not that. Definitely not this trajectory that I've now found myself on these kind of multiple titles of poet, writer, teacher was definitely never what I expected. The traditional route was definitely what I expected, and I guess that was the environment that I was in, and the environment that I grew up in, that my family definitely wanted myself and my siblings to get a good education, find a secure career path, and my siblings all went on to do quite traditional jobs. One of my brothers is an accountant, the other became a doctor, and it was obviously the golden child. And my sister works in HR. And then when I wanted to become a teacher, that was something that my family really understood, and so the role and profession as a teacher was something they understood and respected. But I remember when I wanted to go on to study history, and then later on gender studies, they were a little bit like, what are these things? History they could understand, and my family definitely got that. But I remember when I was doing my master's in gender studies, my whole family were like, what is this? What is gender studies? And I would explain to them what I was studying and the theories that we were looking at, and looking at stuff like toxic masculinity, looking at health, looking at the body, social policy. And yeah, they were totally confused by it all, but they knew it was something I was very passionate about, and knew that was something I really cared about. And when I talked about kind of themes about feminism and equality and fighting for rights for women, I used to apply it a lot to the Sikh faith too, and how a lot of those principles are a part of the Sikh faith. So my family really understood that when I was like, these are the things I'm fighting for, and I would bring it back to our faith and why those things were so important to me.
I love how you connected those two together. You know, something that they've probably, and I know, you know, I always joke about ethnic parents, you know, my family, the same, some subjects, you're like, what is that? Like, what are you studying? Because it's something they haven't grown up with, but how you related it back to, and just showing that connection back to.
Yeah, and things that they could understand and connect to themselves. And later on, when I then started the poetry journey, that was also a big question mark. That was like, what is this now? What is this poetry journey that I'm on? And they knew I'd been writing poetry, and they knew I was very passionate about writing, but the poetry was something I'd kept to myself for many years, over kind of 10, 12 years. I'd kept it all to myself. And when I decided to start performing and starting to share it with the world, my parents did have a lot of reservations, and understandably, they were worried about things like performing late at night in areas they weren't familiar with, and kind of fulfilling perhaps some of those stereotypical understandings, but also the fact that as their daughter, they were worried about me performing in these places. They didn't know where I was, who would be there, and those sort of concerns would come up. So what I eventually started doing was taking them to all my shows. I was like, come see what I do, come see what it is that I do, and what this poetry is all about, and come see how it inspires people. So I started to take them on that journey with me, and they started to come to my shows, and they used to come to these events, and they'd be sitting there and they would see the audience really connecting to the poetry, and they would see how it would inspire people, or they would see at the end of the show when people would come over and want to talk to me about it, or talk about how they really resonated with some of the poetry. And it was one of those typical things of every mum, that when another mum came over and was like, your daughter is doing such amazing things, then my mum was like, oh yeah, she is, that's my daughter. And then she was like totally on board when she started hearing some of the things from other mums.
I can imagine.
Yeah, that's something I definitely talk to a lot of creatives about, and a lot of young people, especially from the South Asian community, that are interested in getting into the arts, or perhaps fields that aren't the traditional migrant routes of the doctor, dentist, accountant, lawyer, accountant. Yeah, when it isn't those traditional routes, how can we get our parents more on board? And one of the things I encourage people to do is see if you can bring your families and your parents with you on that journey. Let them see and experience what it is that you do, so that they can become more familiar with it, because a lot of that fear is just the fear of the unknown. So when they do see what it is and what the potential for it can be, that could be a way of getting them more on board, because we need to see people like ourselves in these industries. We need to see women of color, people of color in these industries, because if we don't, other people are going to be telling our stories for us, and other people are going to be controlling that narrative without us having any say. And that's exactly what I've been trying to show people, that's why we need to be here, so our voice can be heard.
Yeah.
Where would the early performances have been? Like, I can picture a comedy club. I can picture
like a dive bar.
Where does, because I'm sorry, I'm totally out of touch of it, but like, where is the poetry scene? Like, where does it tend to pop up and take place?
The spoken word scene isn't too different from the things you've just described, actually. So yeah, spoken word nights, or open mic nights, are similar to that. They would be venues in all major cities across the UK, and they can be small, they can be big. But when I first started out, the first show I ever performed at was this kind of open mic night for different artists. So it could be musicians, poets, and art in different form to come share. And it was happening in Hounslow in West London. So I'm from East London, born and raised. I have moved to West London since, but at the time I was like, nobody knows me in West London. If I go perform there and it goes terribly wrong, that's okay. I'll just run back home and never do it again. And just got to a point where I felt like, okay, I have nothing to lose here. And that first poem that I actually decided to perform was a poem called Queens and Corpses. And it's actually a really heavy poem about the ongoing son preference in South Asian communities. And the reason I wrote that poem and decided to share it in the first place was because at the time I was doing my master's in gender studies, and I was doing my research thesis on son preference and looking at really heavy issues like female infanticide and sex-selective abortions, and looking at why are these things happening specifically in Punjab in India, where my family comes from, but also how these things have translated in the West. So why do we have this ongoing some preference even going on here in the Western world? And I wrote this 20,000 word paper, and I was super proud of it, and I was working with charities with it. But I realized that not everybody's got the time to read a 20,000 word paper. So I thought, you know what, let me use this skill that I already have, this poetry that I've been doing myself for years. Let me kind of translate this research into a spoken word piece. And that's what I wrote that poem into. And that's where Queens and Corpses came from. And that was the poem I performed on that first night. And my life changed forever from that one night. And it was filmed by somebody in the audience. And the next morning, the video had gone viral. And I was waking up to messages from people in Australia, in India, in North America, in Canada. And I was just amazed that poetry could have this impact on people, and it could be a really accessible way to talk about taboo issues, to talk about social issues. And even on the night, I really saw in the audience eyes how much it connected to the people sitting there, especially the women in that room, that really connected with those words that I was saying and sharing our story and our voice. And then I never stopped. I carried on from that first open mic night and started going to more, started building my confidence, started building kind of my stage presence, my voice, really starting to develop the craft. And I would go to other shows and watch other poets and really started doing the work at that point. And it really grew from there. And I started to share more of my work online, more of my performances online. And it eventually started snowballing, where I was teaching 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, still teaching full time, and then performing at shows 2-3 times a week, doing workshops on the weekends. And that was what the last 5 years really looked like, balancing being, I used to say, a teacher by day and a poet by night.
By night. The real artists.
Yeah. What was this like? You're in the classroom, you get a 10-minute break, you're scribbling poem. Like, how did you manage that, doing the full-time work and kind of doing the creative bit on the side? Like, did you have dedicated time during the week to focus on writing, or was it just free flowing, and if you got inspiration you wrote it down or thought about it? How did that work?
Yeah, so I at that time, I think for those 5 years, it was a lot of what was inspiring me at that time. And that's how I started off, trying to navigate, okay, still teaching full time and dedicating my heart and my soul there. But also, whenever I was feeling inspired to write, or there was issues that I was really passionate about, or causes I really wanted to support, I think a lot of that flow was coming quite naturally to me. But over time, I realized that I had to also put the time in and give it the time when it's needed to. And I kind of started to create a bit more of a structure to it, and giving my time to just free write, and giving my time to just explore different concepts and different styles. And that started happening more over time. But there would be days where a poem would come to me mid-lesson, and I'd be like, I need to hold that and keep that in my mind and hold that for later, because a lot of the time in the classroom and working with young people, I would be so inspired by them and inspired by the things they would teach me and the things that they would show me. So I would be, jotting things down throughout the day. I would be writing on the tube. The tube used to be a really popular time for me to write poetry. So I used to get the Central Line into work every day, and I had a good 45-minute journey on the Central Line, where if I was lucky enough to get a seat, I would sit there and be writing a few poems on the tube. But it really was any time and any moment I could, I'd be writing. And when concepts or ideas would give me inspiration, I'd be jotting them on my phone, on my hand, on Post-it notes. So it was like that for a good 5-6 years.
I really love two things I really loved about that is how you recognize that you needed to do the work, because I think that's something that a lot of people, myself included, at the beginning, you just think, inspiration will strike me all the time and I'll just constantly produce all these things. But actually you need to hone your craft, and sometimes you try something and it might not work, but the more you do that, the more that inspiration does find you, you know, and is a quote that I keep whacking out, but I really love it. Inspiration has to find you working. And I think that's just what you're saying. And then finding the tube quite a meditative place to get that work out. I can just imagine, because there's no other distractions, no phone or TV, just there.
And I wonder, on that point, did the restriction help? As in, like, lots of creatives talk about like having restrictions on materials or time and stuff like that. Was that the case on the tube, where you're like at 45 minutes, and if you put pressure on yourself to produce something, that you're more inclined to make it because there is that window of time? Or was that not relevant at all?
I guess, I think it's a lot to do with that being the only time where there were no other distractions. If I did sit and get a seat on the central line, there would be no other distractions, no other phone beeping, no other things going on. So it did give me that free time to just explore. And even on the tube, lots of things would inspire me, things I would see, people around me, and stories would come to me. But now I found it quite interesting that, because I haven't been on the tube very much, and when I left that particular role and wasn't doing that journey, I then had to think about, okay, other moments where I would need to find time, and putting in that work and putting in that structured time, whether that was after work, after teaching, whether that was on the weekends, but also being very conscious of the fact that I didn't want to burn out either. Balancing these multiple roles was exhausting for 5 years, and I did burn out, and that burnout would also inevitably roll into feeling writer's block and not wanting to write at all. So it did take a good few years till I really got a bit more of that. I'm not going to say balance, because there's never balance, but it did take a good few years till I worked out what worked for me, and what routine really worked for me, and what was the healthiest option for me, for my well-being as well, so that I wasn't burning myself out. But that took a few years.
The practice. Let's go back to the beginning of your poetry writing, because I mean, it sounds like it's been a journey, and we're well into the journey, which is amazing to see. But we've seen the amazing and very moving TEDx talk that you did on how poetry saved your life, and how you would, dealing with anxiety and, finding that out in yourself, and how poetry helped as a process of healing that and working through that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really where the poetry journey first began. When I was about 13, I started suffering from anxiety attacks and panic attacks. And at that point, as a teenager, I had no idea what they were. And to be completely honest with you, I thought I was dying. I thought every time I would have a panic attack, I was having a heart attack, because that was the only thing medically I could associate it to, or to relate it to. And there was a number of reasons why those anxiety attacks and panic attacks were coming. There were things from my childhood that had surfaced. I was being really badly bullied in school, really low amounts of confidence and self-esteem. And over the years, it even then fell into periods of depression as well. And growing up in quite a traditional Punjabi household, mental health was definitely something we didn't talk about. And we're definitely in a different place now, and I'd love to reflect on that too. But at that particular point, it was something I'd heard really negative tropes about. I'd heard really negative slurs being given to people with mental health issues. They would be really kind of shunned, and it was really taboo to even talk about mental health in that way. So I kept it all bottled in and had no one to speak to about it, and used writing as my only outlet. And at the time, I didn't know I was writing poetry. At first, it started as a journal that I still have till this day. And I would just let out all the emotions that were kind of running around chaotically in my mind. I would let them out onto the page. And anything that I was feeling physically, whenever I was having those anxiety attacks or panic attacks, I'd write them out. And I was doing that for quite a few years. And up until around the age of 18, where even my depression got really, really bad. That was probably the first time I started to look for more help. And that's why I talk about the fact that poetry really did save my life during those years, because if I didn't have that one outlet, if I didn't have that some way of unbottling those emotions that I was holding inside, I would have fell into some of those darker thoughts I had, especially around the age of 18. And that's why I wanted to share that story. Doing that TEDx talk was definitely one of the scariest moments of my life, one of the most vulnerable moments of my life, sharing that journey and that story. And I remember just before I did the TED talk, I spoke to my mum and dad about it too, about what I was going to share and what I was going to tell the world. And they were really supportive about it, and going on that journey with them about explaining to them what anxiety is and what a panic disorder looks like and what depression is, was really a journey for all of us to really understand. And I wanted to share that with the world, just so I could show others that perhaps went through similar experiences, that they weren't alone in this. And that there are other options other than the more traditional mental health services that are out there, such as counseling, such as cognitive behavior therapy, talking therapy. There are also more creative outlets that can support your mental well-being alongside perhaps more traditional services too. And that's when I did a bit of research with the Arts and Wellbeing Foundation, and that particular piece of research found that for a cohort that they were researching, poetry and the arts, within 6 weeks of a program of doing poetry specifically for anxiety and depression, can improve people's mood and reduce their anxiety and depression within just 6 weeks. And it can also save the NHS around £200,000 a year. So there's kind of another benefit there, that if we tap
such a short time frame as well, to an effect, to a positive outcome.
6 weeks to feel that difference is incredible. That was something I really wanted to share with not only the South Asian community, but with the wider community as well, that we have these creative outlets that perhaps we can tap into to support our mental well-being and to support what I prefer to call kind of our mental fitness. And I've started using that word a lot more when I'm talking about mental health nowadays, because I want it to be seen as something that we associate with our fitness, because we talk about physical well-being and physical fitness all the time, and we talk about our gym subscriptions, and we'll spend money on our physical health, but would we perhaps put the time and resources into our mental health and our mental fitness as well? That's equally what I want people to start doing, and thinking about the things that support their mental well-being and make their mental health feel nourished. And perhaps writing and poetry can be one of them, just like it was for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a testament for how powerful it was for you, because of how long you kept it up, as you said, before you actually then sought professional help. This was really your way of working through that, and that's just such a testament to the power that it has. And I love how you talk about mental fitness. We actually spoke to a psychotherapist in an earlier podcast, and she was saying exactly the same thing. In fact, she calls some of her practice a mental health workout, a mental workout, because you think of workouts for your body and you think, oh, I should probably do a workout now. But you don't necessarily make the same time to think, oh, I should give my brain, I should do a mental health workout or a mental health stretch. Exactly the same way. So, yeah.
So that's one really good benefit, I guess, of being creative and expressing yourself, is kind of, it can help you deal with things going on in your life or things you're trying to suppress. Kind of on the flip side a little bit, and I think you've done incredibly with this also, is kind of using your creative skills and your voice to raise awareness of issues, causes, the underrepresented, particularly around the Sikh and South Asian communities and women's rights. The answer is obvious, but I still want to ask it, like, why is that important to you?
So that's actually a question I often have to re-ask myself time and time again, about what is it, this mission that I'm on, and what is it, the purpose that I'm trying to serve. And I think a lot of it all comes back to the meaning behind a lot of the work that I do, whether it's teaching and education, whether it's the poetry, whether it's the social activism. I think all of that comes back to this feeling of, I know a lot of people say it, but wanting to leave this world in a better place than I found it. And I feel that for me, That can be through inspiring young people, that can be through writing, that can be through educating, and doing those things to really improve the world in a way that makes a difference. And this comes back to something in the Sikh faith that I always reflect on and connect to a lot. And in the Sikh faith, we have something called seva. And seva means selfless service, and that each and every single one of us is here to perform some sort of seva in this world. And it's really just a matter of finding out what that seva is. What is it that allows you to help others? And that is the mission that I feel like I'm always going to be on. And that will be in different shapes and forms throughout my life. And that's something I'm also starting to understand, that seva can look like lots of different things. That can be in the home, that can be within your family, that can be in the workplace, that can be through activism. And this seva, this selfless service is really what I do it all for, and is what I come back to. And sometimes I do have to remind myself that when there's lots of deadlines, when there's 50 emails waiting in my inbox, when I'm worrying about social media and social media following and all those kind of things that do come up when you're on this road of the work that we do. I do always have to kind of recenter and come back to what is this mission that I am on, and it is to help people, whether that's one person, whether that's 100 people, wouldn't really matter. If it's helping at least one person, then I'm doing the right thing. So yeah.
No, that's really good. Really nice answer, and so genuine as well. And it comes across in everything you've done, just trying to be helpful to people and inspire people.
It sounds like a really good anchor, as you say, just to like a good place to keep coming back to, a good anchor for everything you do.
The next question here is around teaching, in terms of being a history teacher for 5+ years. And to me, teaching is it's definitely one of the hardest jobs you can do, but it's also the most impactful, like inspiring and educating children who will go on to live 50, 60, 70, 80 years and go and do lots of incredible things. What was that experience like, first of all, as in teaching? I have 5 nieces and nephews, and like 2 hours with them I can't imagine teaching a classroom of 20 kids for a whole day for months on end. So like, what was that like? And also just creativity in schools, because that's something that we hear quite often, is that it is something that's being very underfunded. There isn't much focus on it. And yet, as we get older, we realize it is one of the most valuable skills. And people think creativity is just X in a box, but actually it's a wider way of thinking. So yeah, it would be great to get your perspective on that and in the school experience.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, teaching is, I always say to people that you'll never have 2 days that are the same. Every day is completely different challenges, as well as different happy moments too. And I mentioned it earlier that working with young people is so inspiring. You will learn so much from them on a daily basis, as well as them learning from you. And that always looks different every day. But yeah, working with teenagers is definitely not for everybody. There's a lot of patience required. There's a lot of skills that you develop over the years that kind of help you navigate it. Because as a secondary school teacher, I'm working with people as young as 11 years old, all the way up until the age of 18, just before they go off to uni. So that's quite a breadth of age groups, but also such a significant point in their lives as well. So the things that they experience and learn and navigate during those years will be so significant to who they are later on in life. And my role as a teacher, specifically as a history teacher, is to show them the beautiful world of history that is diverse, that is inclusive, and unfortunately, history always gets a bad rap in schools of being one of the boring subjects and being the less fun subjects. And I wanted to come into the classroom and show them how amazing history can be and how relatable it can be to each and every single one of us. So I would want to inspire them to love history as much as I did. So my lessons would not look like an average history lesson that you might remember in school, because I was not an average history teacher. I do not look or sound like your average history teacher. When you think of history teacher, you may remember the teachers you had back in school. And definitely don't look or sound like
exactly. Big white beards.
I did not look like any of those. So I had to bring an element of that to the classroom. And thankfully, that's why lots of students loved coming to my lessons, and lots of them went on to study history and politics and sociology and the humanities. So I guess my mission was met there, that I helped inspire them to love those subjects. But one of the biggest challenges specifically with history was that even till now, I was teaching a curriculum that is not diverse, that is not inclusive, and it's still very Eurocentric. It's still very white male dominated, and teaching that in the classroom was tough, because I would see on the kids' faces that they couldn't see a history that felt relative to them. So I was always trying to pull in extra resources, always trying to bring in those other narratives and those other histories. And that was on me to bring in a lot of that extra work and resources, and to make those lessons more exciting and engaging. Yeah. And not all teachers can do that. And not all teachers should have to do that. A lot of that should be given to them. So this is kind of an ongoing discussion and an ongoing fight about what our national curriculum should look like here in the UK. And I think that goes hand in hand with this issue with creativity being lost from our schools and being lost from our classrooms, because there is so much of a focus on what our curriculum should look like and what academic attainment they should be achieving and what grades and levels they should be at by this age and this age and this age, that we're losing so much of that. And it's really hard to see, because as a creative myself, being in that environment was often really upsetting, really draining, to be in that environment where you could see such important parts of being a young person, and also then in our adult lives too, about being creative and allowing ourselves to be creative. Being stripped away from them is really difficult. But for myself, I was always trying to bring creativity into the classroom wherever I could. And whether it was teaching about the Vietnam War and the Viet Cong and setting up fake booby traps around the classroom, or whether that was writing a spoken word piece in reflection to a speech by Martin Luther King. I was always trying to bring in creative elements wherever I could, and letting the young people themselves navigate what creativity looks like for them, and giving them the freedom and the space to do that and the time to do that. And I always used to say that my classroom was a safe space, whether that was in the lesson or whether that was lunch times and break times or after school. My classroom was always a space where kids would love to come talk and discuss and debate. I used to run lots of extracurricular clubs too, like a feminist society, a debate club. So it was always a space for them to explore these other sides of themselves that they might not necessarily get to do in the kind of strict formal classroom setting.
Yeah, I should have come to your class. I love that. It's so true. It's when you're young and learning, you don't know what's out there in other forms of playing with the subject or experiencing a subject, like you said, and one way might, just reading might not work for you, but actually debating a topic and flipping it both sides might resonate, or hearing a piece of spoken word might resonate. And I think it's, a credit to you that you brought that into the classroom, and I'm sure the children absolutely appreciated that. And what you said about a safe space, I absolutely resonate with. And it's something we always say actually in the studio as well, when people come to visit and do something creative, there's no right or wrong here, it's just about you playing and expressing and having a good time and doing what feels right.
Yeah. When I think back to school, like being afraid, used to go around the classroom and ask students to read out particular paragraphs. And I would never remember what's in the paragraph, because I'm so focused on making sure I don't sound stupid when I say it, because that whole safe space thing isn't necessarily there. So that's really refreshing to hear. And I think with history in general, it's something most adults revisit because they appreciate that they weren't fully into it in school. And they're like, it's so important to be aware of your history and all the different perspectives, because that's what shaped where we are now. And kind of, I think Sapiens is a hugely popular book, because that's almost like, it's a big book, but it kind of packs a lot in to kind of provide where we come from and all that kind of stuff, which is great. That was a ramble, so apologies for that.
No, it's I think it's very true.
Where are we at? We've about 20 more questions here.
Oh gosh,
so
yeah.
We're very conscious of time.
Okay.
There's so many things we want to ask you.
I'll go here. The creative process. So
Cool.
On your creativity, where do you get your poetry inspiration from? You talked a bit about having it from your experiences or, from your thesis, which I thought was brilliant, summarizing that into a spoken word piece. But in general, what do you find sparks your creativity? And then what is your process for creating them? Do you have a set process?
So the inspiration behind the creativity can come from a number of different places. It could be the injustices I'm trying to fight at that particular point in time. It could be things that I've read. It could be work from other creatives. It could be other poets and writers that have kind of inspired some of my own work. But sometimes I do try to take out dedicated time to research what it is that I want to create and what it is that I want to write. And I think that time to research and a little bit of that kind of planning is also important with the kind of creativity that I do in terms of writing and poetry, that if you read some of my work and read some of specifically the kind of longer poems, you'll see that there's actually a lot of academic research that goes behind some of those pieces.
Yeah.
And I spoke about Queens and Corpses coming from my master's thesis, but if you even look at some of the other poems that I've written, you'll see academic theory in there, you'll see scholars in there, you'll see philosophers in there, you'll see quotes and kind of trinkets from things that I've learned and read through research. So that kind of goes hand in hand with a bit of my actual writing process as well, that sometimes there'll be moments of kind of pure inspiration, and that would be me sitting there letting out whatever thoughts and lines and rhymes come to me. And that's kind of more of the free writing time, that kind of that natural inspiration. But there's also the other side of my creative process, which actually takes a bit more time and takes a bit more research and takes a few different stages in that process. And there'll be a number of different drafts. And you can, I can personally see the difference between some of the pieces that are pure inspiration and which are the pieces that have taken a bit more time and a bit more research. And I think they both have beauty in them, and they both are equally as valid for different reasons. But there are some pieces where I say, okay, no, this needs a bit more time, and this needs a bit more pause, and this needs a bit more reflection before I get it out there and before I share it with the world. Whereas some other pieces where you can feel the real heat, the real passion, the real fire, and I'll be like, no, this is it. This is what the world needs to hear. This is what I'm ready to share, and I will. So it's a combination of the two of them. And I think that kind of defines a lot of who I am as well.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. Exactly.
The one side of me that is very, I guess, the teacher side of me, the academic side of me, the researcher in me. But the other side of me that is just spontaneous and fiery and passionate equally comes out as well. So it's balancing the two of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a stupid question again. Just on and I have loads of questions I'd love to ask just on like the mechanics of poetry, but I won't. But kind of with poetry, is there certain poems you'll write and just will never perform? As in, it just doesn't feel like it's something that should be spoken word kind of projected. It should be left to the person's imagination to almost figure out the nuances of it. Or is that totally wrong? Like, can every poem you've written be performed? Or is there like performance poetry almost in the kind of just putting it out there and presenting it to people, and poetry that's just to be kind of read in solitude and not to be performed?
I guess the particular themes will answer that question a bit better. I think when I'm writing about themes like love and deeper emotions that kind of sit inside me sometimes, those ones I like to just leave for the page, and I like for people just to read and interpret them for themselves without too much of my own voice coming through in them. So those particular themes I do just leave to the page, and that's definitely where my love poetry comes in. The poems that are about the kind of social justice issues, and when I'm talking about identity, when I'm talking about race, and when I'm talking about my voice as a woman of color and as a Punjabi Sikh woman, those ones I know when I write them, I want them to be heard.
Okay.
And as I'm writing them, I can even hear them. And as I'm writing them, I'm thinking about how I personally would want them to be delivered, and how I would deliver them on a stage, and how I want them to be sound. So they're written with the intention of being heard. So yeah, I guess it depends on what theme I'm writing about. Will it be something that needs a voice and I want the world to hear? Or will it be something that's perhaps a bit softer, something that I want to hold inwards and just can stay on the page? Yeah.
No.
That's beautiful to hear, that you're holding it inwards, but you're leaving it on the page for somebody else still to enjoy. So it's still out there, but out there in a different way.
Yeah.
And yeah, it must be really cool. Like if 5 people read the same poem, they will read it differently. They'll have like their tone will be different at different points, and they'll emphasize things differently. Yeah. That must be quite interesting to kind of see that. Anyway, next question. On to tell us about your upcoming book, Brown Girl Like Me, which is due to come out in the autumn.
Yeah.
What's the journey been like to kind of bring that from an idea into not fully real life, but very close to being real life?
Very close to book you can smell and touch and feel.
And hold. Yeah, so Brown Girl Like Me, honestly, it started many years ago. This would be when I was about 18 or 19, when I first started feeling like, why is there not a book to help me navigate being a brown girl? Why is there not a book that's kind of sharing my stories and my experiences, or giving advice on how to navigate a lot of the very confusing questions that many women of color go through, but specifically as a brown woman who was born and raised here in the West and born and raised in East London, but balancing these multiple identities of what it means to be a brown woman and all the things that encompass who we are. And for years, I felt like I couldn't see any of those stories being told. I couldn't see them in literature. I couldn't see them in historiography. I couldn't see them in nonfiction, fiction. I couldn't see them in mainstream media either. And I was like, brown women exist. We are here.
Yeah.
Why is our story not being told? Or when it was being told, when I would see it in kind of mainstream media, it was the same old tropes coming out time and time again about Asian women being passive and Asian women being oppressed and Asian women being docile. And I was like, well, the brown women I know are so much more than this. Yes, that may be a part of some of the things that we have faced and suffered, but there is so much more. There's so much more to who we are. And that went on for years. I then went to university and then went into the working world and kind of still felt that sense of being erased and ignored and stereotyped. And that brought me to then coming up with the concept for this book and writing down this idea for Brown Girl Like Me. And I actually first wrote the idea for it when we were on our honeymoon. We were at a campsite. I was sitting on my laptop, just kind of reflecting on some of these ideas. And I guess that's where travel really helps. It gives you time to kind of decompress and let these things come kind of forward in your conscience a little bit. And I started writing down those ideas. And when we got back to the UK, started formalizing that proposal a little bit more, started looking into the publishing industry a little bit more in different avenues, whether that was self-publishing, whether that was crowdfunding, or going through the more traditional route of finding an agent and trying to approach a publishing house. And I started to really do the work, do the research. I spent a good couple of months of understanding that whole industry, to the point where I then got myself a literary agent and started putting that proposal together and finessing it. And then at that same stage was when I decided to take a break from teaching. And it wasn't because I hated teaching or hated the classroom or hated young people. It was just because it felt like the right time to take a pause from that and look at this journey of being a poet and a writer a little bit more. So that was in late 2019. So I left teaching in December of 2019. In January of 2020, started working on this pitch and this proposal, kind of really finessing it. And then we sent it out to publishers. And then obviously in March of 2020, we had the worldwide pandemic and the whole world turned upside down. And I didn't know what would happen from there. I thought maybe this wasn't the right time to get the book out there. Maybe it's not going to get published. Maybe no one's going to sign it. And felt a little disheartened then. But within a few weeks, we then started getting offers and the book went to auction. It was all very exciting. And I was in the really fortunate position of then deciding which publisher I wanted to go with. And I decided to pick a publisher that really felt the right place for my book and my story, and really understood this message, and decided to sign with Pan Macmillan's Bluebird in May of last year. And since then, I've been working on the book, and the concept was obviously something I'd thought of for years. And I knew what themes I wanted to touch on, and that was themes like mental health, things like the body and body image, things like the classroom and our education system, as well as bringing it more into kind of this new decade as well. So I do look on topics like living in a digital age, and what does that mean for women of colour, where in this last decade we've seen a lot of South Asian women using social media as a way to understand their identity and navigate their identity and find solidarity and sisterhood, which has definitely been a really positive thing in the digital age. But also, how do we navigate the scary place that is the digital world, and the dangers and the lack of safety that's also in those same spaces? So how do we find sisterhood and solidarity, but also keep ourselves safe? So it's really looking at everything there is to be a brown woman in this day and age. And it's definitely the book I wish had existed for myself, and will hopefully help lots of other brown women like myself too. And I've been interviewing women from across the country to gather their stories and gather their voices on these particular issues. There's kind of leaders in their field, there are young people, there is kind of my youngest interviewee is 15, and the eldest is probably in her late 90s. So we've got a real age range of
that is a real life range.
Yeah, because I wanted just to reflect all those different demographics, and I didn't want it to be London centric either. So I definitely wanted to interview women who are living in the Midlands and different parts of the UK as well, to make sure their stories and their voices are heard. So yeah, it's a really special book. And now that I've finished the first draft of the manuscript just a few weeks ago, and just kind of reflecting on that feeling, I never expected it to be such a healing process for me personally. And it was surfacing a lot of things I'd held inside for a lot of years, and really unpacking those things. But also hearing other women's stories as well, and realizing that their experiences were so similar, or perhaps so different, and understanding those perspectives was really important. So that's what I've been doing for the last year. So during
imagine how incredible that sounds. Like an incredible process.
And am I right in saying that it's the first kind of book of its kind, as in
a long
the stories
time.
You're sharing? Yeah, or at least for 40 years or something like that. Am I right in saying?
Yeah, that was it. That was one of the major things that came out of doing a bit of research into why was there a lack of literature in this way, or why were there no other non-fiction books. And the only other one I could find in the same sense that looks at South Asian women in the UK and their stories and collecting these narratives, the last one was in 1979, and it was a fantastic book by Amrit Wilson called Finding Our Voice. But the fact that there had been nothing else other than that for 40 years just made no sense for me. And it was about time that we have a newer version of that story of what does it mean today in this, especially in this new crazy time of this new decade. So
absolutely, I was just going to say
it's like decades within years now. I think is kind of what's happening.
1979 to now, there's probably like 100 years worth of stuff has happened. In a very short time. Just before we round off, I'd love to explore a little bit about creativity and happiness, and a little bit about how you use creativity for your well-being. I know we've obviously touched a lot on that before in your earlier years and how you develop poetry, but do you have any daily or weekly rituals that you follow that make you feel happier, or you use for some self-care?
Yeah, no, really important. And this is something I've been trying to navigate a lot, obviously, in the last 12 months, about how do I separate writing as a writer, as my job, from the writing that's just for me.
Yeah.
Because I do have to come back to the fact that I started writing and I started poetry as a way to heal. And that was something that was just for me and for myself to heal. So now that it's also become my job, essentially, how do I separate the two? So it's something I'm still trying to navigate. But what I'm trying to do now is actively and proactively 3 times a week, taking the time to journal and taking the time to write poetry that has got nothing to do with anything else I'm doing. That's just my time. It's got nothing to do with my book. It's got nothing to do with commissions. It's got nothing to do with any of those outside external factors. And that's just my time to sit and write. And that's something I've kind of more consciously been doing only in the last couple of months, of taking 3 times a week just to spend that free writing time for myself. And I think that's something a lot of creatives have to be conscious of, when the thing that we love and the thing that heals us also becomes our job, essentially, and it's also the thing that's putting food on the table, and it also is that part of our life. It's really important to differentiate the difference and still using those tools for yourself as well as giving out to the world. And it's something that one of my mentors said to me recently, and it's a question I couldn't even answer, where she said to me, a lot of the work that I do, whether it's teaching, whether it's poetry, whether it's writing, I do a lot of work that's giving energy out. And I said, yes, those things are me giving energy out and giving to other people. And then she asked me, what am I doing to put energy back in? What am I doing to fill and nourish myself?
Yeah.
And I couldn't answer the question. And that was quite a significant moment for me, that I couldn't answer that question. I couldn't actually figure out anything that wasn't giving energy out. I was still naming things. I was like, oh, how about this? And she said, no, that's still giving energy out. And how about this? And she'd say, no, that's still giving energy out. So that's something I'm figuring out right now. What is it that I'm doing just for myself to refill that energy? Because when you're doing creative jobs that is giving out a lot of energy, you need to be filling yourself back up, and you need to be taking the time to fill yourself back up.
I mean, I could not agree with that more. Like, we say that all the time, the irony of setting up a creative business and then hardly ever doing it ourselves, because you're always thinking about that email or, it's taken us some time to get to.
Yeah, it's hardly ever doing it just for enjoyment.
Yes,
we set it up because we love doing creative things. We're like, cool, everybody should be doing this, so let's try and set up a space to do it. And then it's like, if I'm doing lino printing, I'm thinking, oh, how can we teach this a bit better the next time, rather than just enjoying the lino printing as an example.
Oh, should I record this so I can put it on Instagram, and it's just
the thing that I found really good. I've started very intentionally doing the artist's way. You might have heard of the book. It's a Julia Cameron book, and it's kind of for artists to rediscover their creative side almost. And it's just like, I'm doing that. I'm not showing anybody the stuff I'm making, and kind of following the process and just being creative for just enjoyment on a Friday morning or Saturday morning, spending 2 or 3 hours. And it's so nice, because I kind of almost in my head just push that as like, that's not a thing I can enjoy because it's work, but it's slowly kind of coming back again. Which is nice. I like how they call it an artist date with yourself.
I like that.
Yeah, have an artist date, and that's with the date you don't have any other commitments. You show up feeling fresh, feeling good, feeling intentional. And that's what you do. And I need to copy that and take a leaf out of that book, because every time you do it, it does totally.
Look what I made.
It's always like that.
Is there anything else before we kind of go towards the end, just I'm conscious of time now? Is there any other daily or weekly rituals that you'd recommend for people listening? As in, really good advice to kind of sit down, have intentional time to just be creative and enjoy whatever you're doing with no expectations, no worries about work or anything. Is there any other things you do? I don't know, like go for long walks or have a cup of green tea in the morning, or anything else that might be useful for people?
Yeah, those exactly those things that aren't necessarily to do with work or necessarily to do with those kind of activities are going for long walks. I'm really thankful that our dog gets us out of the house twice a day. So a good 1 hour walk in the morning, a good 1 hour walk in the evening.
Wow.
And though I usually don't take my phone with me either, which is really lovely. So no pinging, no notifications, no nothing. Or if I do have my phone on me, it's usually on silent. And those 2 hours a day I call them precious. I call it precious time because it really is precious time where I'm taking that time just to be with me and my husband and our dog and being out in nature and really absorbing that time. So going for long walks is definitely one for me, and I do that twice a day. A new one this year has also been gardening, which I never thought I'd be a gardener or a planting fanatic, but like over the last 12 months, we also are a carer for my husband's grandma, and she's definitely got green fingers, so we've been learning lots from her. But gardening is another thing which is just something for me. I don't have to attach it to any of my other work or any of my writing or who I am in that space. Gardening is just for me, and growing our vegetables and planting different flowers. And obviously this time of year is perfect, so we're kind of starting to sow all our seeds, and we'll be harvesting them then later in the summer. It's a really lovely time. But yeah, gardening has been a new one. I thought that would be something I'd do later on in life, but at 28, I'm already loving gardening. You can be any age.
By the time you're at 70, you'll be a master. You'll be like a landscaper.
Out of interest, have you planted any potatoes? And the reason I ask this is that a couple of friends of mine had allotments and they planted potatoes, and they you can grow a lot of potatoes in a small space, so you end up with hundreds more than you actually need.
Really?
Yeah, potatoes are so robust. You can grow them anywhere. So it doesn't matter too much about where you're growing them or how great the soil is or how much space you have. Potatoes are a really easy one to do anywhere. And yeah, you will find that when you harvest it, you're like, what do I do with this many potatoes?
Really?
Yeah. We had the same thing last year that we just started gardening. We're so excited. We planted so much, and ended up harvesting so many potatoes at the end of it. But what we did was we did freeze what we could. So we cut up some of the potatoes. If you soft boil them and freeze them, you can use them for chips. So we tried to be quite creative with what we did with all the potatoes, so nothing went to waste.
Yeah.
We did potatoes, carrots, lots of green food, so spinach and greens and peas. But yeah, this summer we're going to be a bit more creative and see anything different we can try this year. So yeah, gardening.
Oh my goodness. Guys, make sure everyone listening, make sure you check out her Instagram, if only for seeing what they harvest this month. It's incredible. I love seeing what you guys have in your garden.
Is that a different one to Behind the Netra?
No, it's the same. How have you found your general approach to life and time changing, if at all, since pursuing a more creative vocation?
Yeah, I guess one of the biggest things from going from full-time teaching to then part-time teaching, then to no teaching, was that sense of structure completely went out the window. That as a teacher, what I say is you live your life in 6 weeks. So a term is 6 weeks. Every 6 weeks, you're going to have some sort of holiday, whether that's a half term, whether that's a Christmas break or an Easter break. You know what your term looks like. You know what every single day looks like in the term sense of you have a timetable for the week. You know what lessons you're teaching, and everything is very structured. To then becoming self-employed or becoming an entrepreneur, your lifestyle looks completely different. And I, as somebody that likes keeping busy, was falling into some bad habits at the start of always working and consistently feeling like I had to be busy or consistently feeling like I had to be productive. And that got to a point where I was burning out and I was getting exhausted and I wasn't making time for myself or for nourishing myself or supporting my mental fitness. So that's something I'm starting to navigate and understand a bit better now about how do I set boundaries? How am I dealing with my time a bit better? How do I say no is one of the biggest things for me recently, of not feeling the need to say yes to everything. And I think that's something that in this industry, you may feel like you need to do, that you need to say yes to every opportunity that comes through, because you might be afraid that something like that won't come up again, or what will happen if I miss this opportunity. But I think the moment you start to respect yourself and you respect your own time, other people will too. And saying no when I need to, or kind of setting the boundaries that I need to is really important for myself, so that I can kind of convey that to others as well, and other people respect that time too. So yeah, I think that's been one of the biggest shifts for me, and one of the biggest things I'm trying to navigate about having a super structured life as a teacher to a very unstructured life now, and how does that look for me, and how do I make that work, as well as balancing all the other parts of who I am and the other parts of my life, like being a wife and being a daughter and being a sister and being an auntie and being a friend. How do I make sure all those really important parts of me don't get lost, and I do take the time to nourish all those things, as well as my work life?
Yeah, that's a really nice way to put it. Nourishing kind of things outside of work or the day job or your creative vocation, whatever the case is. It's so important, because,
and nourish is a very intentional word, which I like. It's not by accident, by the by. It's I'm intentionally gonna give time to this.
Okay, so the last thing, because we had a question about the proudest moment in your life, but I think it's probably the Queen thing. But is there another one that you might wish to add?
I wouldn't say that's my proudest moment. I'll definitely say that was a really special moment. But the proudest moment, I think the proudest moment would have to be more recent, actually. And I think I'm still trying to reflect on it a little bit more. But right now, one of the proudest moments was the CBBC film that I worked on recently.
Top Knot or Not.
Yeah, the Top Knot or Not was something very unexpected. I'd always been really interested in script writing and writing short stories. So that was definitely a creative part of me that I was exploring. But I was then given the opportunity to write this short film, and it was my first script to screen project. And it was telling the story of a young Sikh boy deciding whether he wants to keep his hair or not. And it was a really personal story, just because my husband is a turban wearing Sikh. My nephews are all growing their hair and all have top knots. So it was a really personal story in that sense, that it related to a lot of the people in my life that I'm very close to. And I really wanted to do justice to that story and to tell it as authentically as I could. And when it then released out into the world, and when everyone got to see it, the reaction was incredible. And I'm still receiving messages to this day about how moved people were by it, or how incredible it was for them to see somebody that looked like them on a TV screen. So I think at the moment, this may change, but that was probably one of my most proudest moments.
Amazing.
As a writer.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, no, well done. And I have to give a shout out to Indy, just because I'm sure he'd be listening. So hello, Indy. Dana used to work with Indy years ago. Really great guy. Obviously your partner and husband and life and business now a little bit, and all sorts of things. But
he's been here every step of the journey, and it's now becoming a bit more formal in terms of us working together, which is quite an exciting journey. But he has been there every step of the way. He was there at that campsite when we first started writing that book proposal. He was there when we were researching how to get published and finding a literary agent. He was there every moment I got rejections and every moment that I failed, as well as all the beautiful successful moments too. There's been times of failure and rejection over the last couple of years as well, where I had to pick myself back up, and he was there with me every moment of the way. So I'm so grateful for him being the partner that has supported me along this entire journey. So we laugh sometimes, and I've never said this before, so you're getting a real exclusive here, and he's going to laugh so much when he hears this. But when with the name Behind the Netra was something I came up with, obviously, when I first started, and it was my stage name, and Netra Netra means kind of the soul behind your eyes, and it's a Sanskrit word with lots of different meanings. But he sometimes laughs and says he is behind the Netra. He is behind it. Yeah, it's a running joke we have. But yeah, he's a huge part of the entire journey, and it's exciting. We're going to be working more together now and seeing what that looks like too.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, nice. He's going to love this bit.
He's going to love that. Yeah.
So if you wouldn't mind sharing, where can people find out more about you? And if, I guess, the book as well, if people want to find out more about the book, I know, I'm not sure if it's available to pre-order, but if there's a website or anything around it, feel free to share now. And then I think we're going to wrap up with, if possible, a favorite line or two from one of your favorite poems, if you wouldn't mind reciting one. Yeah. If you can remember. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, no problem at all. So yeah, you can find all my socials at Behind the Netra, that's Netra. My website, www.behindthenetra.com. But for the book, by this summer, so summer of 2021, the pre-order link will be coming out. So definitely keep an eye out for that. We will be having an exciting book cover reveal, and the pre-order link will be coming out this summer. So yeah, do stay tuned for that. And yeah, I'd be honored to share a bit of a poem. And as a spoken word poet, we have to memorize a lot of our poems. So I'm lucky whenever I get put on the spot, there will always be one that's kind of sitting there.
Amazing.
Yeah, it comes to me. So I'll share, it's a poem called I Am. It's definitely a poem I love to open every show with, every event that I do. It's one that I wrote for International Women's Day a few years ago. So this is I Am. I am raising my voice so all the forgotten voices can be heard. And I am holding my fist in the air for the independent women that are given the B words. And I am clearing up the blurred lines, because in these confines, I still stand here with a strong spine. Because what is mine, and a no means no, and a yes means yes, and yes. I am her stories that have been forgotten from the histories, these historical women treated as if they were mysteries, his story. You're feeding us a false etymology. I am more than every single one of my responses being an apology. I am every lioness ripping through the stereotypes attached to our gender. I am the feminist agenda, the so-called burned bras, the lack of female main role movie stars, all the girls in my gender study seminars. I am the women chained to railings to get our vote. I am every hunger strike guarding their throats. I am Miss McCarthy teaching me I can achieve anything. I am the female warriors, my Bugor Bodicea that could defeat any king. I am my trainers who said I got a mean left hook. And I am all the women forgotten from my school textbooks. A little bit from I Am.
What a way to end. Thank you so much, Jaspreet, for joining us and sharing that incredible poem. Everyone, please check out Behind the Netra to see more about Jaspreet. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me. This has been honestly one of my favorite podcasts to record. So thank you guys so much and letting me share my journey with you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the end of that episode. We really hope you enjoyed it and would love to hear what you learned. If you haven't yet, be sure to click that subscribe button and get first dibs on all future episodes.
Also, be sure to check out the previous ones because there's some fantastic nuggets and amazing guests there too. We do this podcast for free in the hope that you can benefit from it. So any support you can give us would be incredible. Please tell your friends, tell your neighbors, your parents, your cats and dogs about it. We would love to really grow this podcast even better. Please leave us a review. We love reading them.
And if you'd like to explore that creative side of yours, be sure to check out at MYO London or at Creative Jungle Co on Instagram and get in touch.
Here's to a much more creative and happier life.
You got this, you creative legend.